Good morning, good morning. All right, we're continuing on with tragedy and truth. What happened at Hawn's Mill? We just read about how it had only taken 2 years, from 1831 to 1833, for them to have mob violence against the church, to throw out the printing press, to scatter the Book of Commandments, which would be the Doctrine and Covenants later on, tar and feather the bishop. And it had to do with cultural differences. It had to do with pride and assumption on some of the members' church part, apparently. Not can't be certain on that one. Because, like I said, when you have a sour taste in your mouth, anything that person does becomes awful. And then, yeah, this is why you don't want to give offense to people, but just stand for truth. Like, you don't want to try to offend people, but you don't want to back down from what's right either. Anyway, even John C. McCoy was saying that the Mormons received at the hands of their Gentile neighbors very harsh treatment. It was cruel. Expulsion from Jackson County. Beginning November 6th, women and children fled in every direction before a merciless mob, wrote Parley P. Pratt. Some fled southward to Van Buren County, others east to Lafayette and Ray counties, but most crossed the Missouri River into Clay County at points along a 15-mile sweep of the river. On November 7th, crowds amassed at Independence Landing, 3 miles north of the Temple Lot. Emily Partridge said that of the hundreds present, some in tents, some in open air, around their fires, while the rain descended in torrents. She continued, husbands were inquiring for their wives, and women for their husbands, parents for children, children for parents, some with provisions, some without. The scene was indescribable. Jeez Louise. It took 2 weeks at Independence Landing, using Everett's Ferry, to get the saints at that site across the river. After the exiles were driven from their homes, their fields of corn were plundered and destroyed. Pratt noted stacks of wheat were burned, and Pratt's own household goods were either destroyed or stolen. After the saints crossed the Missouri River, conditions in Clay County remained poignant. Why would it be poignant? I would say potent, but okay. Scattered for miles along the river bottoms, in groups, the expatriates exposed their wives and little ones to the cold and chilling blasts of winter without shelter, wrote Joseph Thorpe, a Clay County farmer and later judge. Late in December, while in a near state of starvation, and while camped by a huge sycamore log used for a wall and a blanket for cover, Harriet White gave birth to a son, Lyman Lehi White. Emily Austin, a member of the Colesville branch, still clinging to her neighbors at the river bottoms, said, "We lived in tents until winter set in, and did our cooking out in the wind and storms. Log heaps were our parlor stoves, and the cold, wet ground our velvet carpets, and the crying of our little children our pianoforte." From the north bank of the Missouri River in December, Phelps wrote to Joseph Smith for help. The situation of the saints, as scattered, affords a gloomy prospect, he said. Our clothes are worn out. We want the necessities of life. In their search for the promised land, the distressed little multitude had not lived up to its ideals. Some had disobeyed counsel, while the others had used poor judgment. In In his same December in 1833 letter to Joseph, Phelps wrote, "I know it was right that we should be driven out of the land of Zion, that the rebellious might be sent away." Kirtland, a month later, a revelation said of the exiled saints, "They have been afflicted in consequence of their transgressions. In its sacred quest for the holy city, Zion stumbled." Okay, this is an interesting thing. We are given in this book the juxtaposition of information. We're given very precious little about the scenes beforehand that caused mobs to descend upon the saints. Mainly it came from them writing in that newspaper about doctrine and inviting people everywhere, including freed slaves, to come, which sparked a firestorm, plus the fact that they just were overrunning them in population. They were going to change the landscape politically, and because culturally they were so different, they decided to do something about it. Followed by which we get these scenes of horror visited on our memories by their journals. But yet, here we are just given that some had disobeyed counsel, they had not lived up to the ideals. Some had disobeyed counsels, others had used poor judgment. And they felt that it should right that the rebellious might be driven away. That's harsh criticism for people who just wanted to go to Zion early and no, I guess there's more to it. And the thing is I wish we had more of it to understand. What did it mean that they were rebellious? What does it mean that they were? Is it because they went there without a plan? Is it because they went there without? Was it innocently or was it rebelliously that they're like, "Well, I'm going to go to Zion. Why do I have to wait for anyone else? Why should I do this in wisdom and order?" I mean, was it a rebellious spirit, honestly? Or was this justifying the matter after the fact? That's a hard one to say. So, pictures on this page. William Wines Phelps was among those who filed for suit of his loss of his Jackson County property. He asked for $50,000 and was awarded $750. Edward Partridge family similarly filed and was awarded 1 cent in damages. And then they talk about Zion's camp. About 200 men enlisted and marched 800 miles from Ohio to Missouri to join forces. Missouri Governor Daniel Dunklin offered to call up the state's militia to assist in escorting the Mormons back into Jackson County to reclaim their property. This offer, coupled with a revelation from the Lord in Doctrine and Covenants 103, led to the formation of Zion's camp. So let's keep reading, and here's the pictures, though. Here's W.W. Phelps, there's the governor, there's a picture about Zion's camp. But I truly wonder, to me, if anything you could lay at the feet of the saints, they talk about them being rebellious. If there was truly a rebellious spirit of, oh, well, this is going to be our land, being presumptuous and annoying to your neighbors, that is bad. Being self-righteous, being self-righteous, being judgmental, being rebellious towards God's commands about, I want you to do it this way. And you're like, well, I don't care what you want. I'm going here because you said these promises are going to be here, and I'm going to do it the way I want. A rebellious spirit like that would not be okay. I think people being willing to cause trouble with their neighbors did not help. How much of this the saints are guilty of, I don't know. But the only thing that we have is these little tiny excerpts. So if we can learn something from it, it would be that you should listen to the Spirit of the Lord. That if you find that you are crossing lines, causing contention, you are... See, it's funny because I keep thinking of Word Radio and Cardinal is talking about, yeah, but this is niceness culture. And I understand the problem of having too much niceness culture, where you give way your principles for the sake of being nice to one another. That you give up truth and precious truths just because you would rather be nice with the other children. That's not the way it should be. You should be able to stand for principle and say, no, I'm here. This is my property. I'm trying to do what is right. I'm trying to do what right is helping my neighbors. It is to being kind to those in need. It is to be uplifting the poor. And I have to do it in wisdom and order. I'm not going to be perfect. I'm a human being. I'll help everyone that I can. I can't help everyone, but I'll do my best. One of the best things that I can do is teach others to do the same. To do as Jesus does. To think like he does. To ask, to do things in his name. And to do it righteously. That kind of thing. So, follow God's Spirit. Do not give up on principles for niceness culture, for the sake of getting along. Don't do that. But do the best you can to build a Zion-like people that helps their neighbors. Wow. This is just a mess. So, they have been afflicted in the consequence of their transgressions. In its sacred quest for the holy city, Zion stumbled. The exiled saints survived the winter and spring by working for the friendly local citizens of Clay County. Michael Arthur, a slave owner, industrialist, and farmer, employed several destitute Mormons. John Whitmer soon rented a house from Arthur, worked at his whiskey still, borrowed money from him, and pulled corn for a neighbor. Shabel Allen. Parley P. Pratt wrote that he was reduced to the lowest poverty. He continued, I made a living by day labor, jobbing, building, or woodcutting. Lyman Wright worked at Arthur's mill and helped build a house for him. When spring work was available, Joseph Thorpe said, the Mormons in the main were industrious, good workers and gave general satisfaction to their employers and could live on less than any people I ever knew. This is high praise. I am grateful for it. I would hope that our members learn to continue to do the same. I think it helps them to become prosperous. It's not how much you make, it's how much you spend, is a good way to put it. But at the same time, when read in conjunction with everything else, I'm also sitting here going, well, yeah, because they had to. After the Mormons were driven from Jackson County, they quickly sought criminal prosecution in the courts for crimes they had suffered. Governor Daniel Dunklin authorized a court of inquiry and sent Robert W. Wells, the state attorney general, to Independence to observe the hearings during February 1834. A term of circuit court. Nevertheless, even with the state militia present, which had guarded the Mormon witnesses from Clay County, 70 of the mob, the severity of the mob spirit and citizen intimidation against the witnesses were so out of control that both Wells and the circuit attorney recommended an end to the hearings. The veto of the mob. We've seen a resuscitation of this. Eventually, the suits and legal processes progressed so slowly and were so costly to the Mormons that they dropped them. Ah, yes, let us use the system as the weapon. A revelation to Joseph Smith directed Missouri church leaders to seek redress through the local courts and to petition Missouri officials, specifically Governor Dunklin, and even U.S. President Andrew Jackson, who passed the request to the secretary of Watt Lewis Cass. Ultimately, however, all failed. Attempts for civil redress at Independence also failed to obtain judgments, As special test cases, however, Phelps and Partridge received a charge of venue to have their cases tried in Richmond-Ray County. In 1836, the circuit court there finally made a decision in their favor, although Phelps had asked for $50,000 for the destruction of his brick press building, including his residence, the press, its equipment, and book supplies. The court rendered him the sum of $750 for the assault upon Edward Partridge by the accused Robert Johnson and others, for beating him with many violent blows and tarring and feathering him at the square in Independence in July 1833. The court awarded Bishop Partridge a disheartening judgment of 1 cent. Three years from middle of 1833 to 1836, and he gets 1 cent. Justice delayed is justice denied, and especially when you have a ruling like that. Oh, you were tarred and feathered? Here's a penny for your troubles. You're alive. For having your house ripped down, printing press destroyed, and all the money and time and effort that was just scattered to the wind, and the destruction that it incurred. Here's pittance, $750. What's fascinating about this is, remember that Joseph Smith and members of the church, they're going through the courts bottom to top. They're not skipping out. They're trying to do things right and legally in the system the way it should be. Zion's Camp, Governor Daniel Dunklin offered to use the state militia to escort the Mormons back to Jackson County once they petitioned a request. However, if they returned to their lands, the Mormons would have to protect themselves from further violence in Jackson County, which, that worked well when they were disarmed by the militia earlier, which gave need for the presence of a protective local Mormon force. Upon receiving the revelation, February 24th, 1834, to organize a quasi-military police and relief party to aid the exiled Mormons in Clay County, Joseph Smith was elected by the Kirtland High Council Commander-in-Chief of the Armies of Israel, later known as Zion's Camp, to lead this operation. Eventually, 205 men enlisted. On this page, the paintings are: when Zion's Camp reached Missouri, enraged citizens swore that the Mormons would see hell before the morning, and as the mobs gathered to attack, a storm arose of such fury it flooded the rivers, drowned trees, and scattered the mobs. The timely intervention saved the outnumbered soldiers of Zion's Camp. And also in June of 1834, members of Zion's Camp, among them Hiram Smith, were attacked with the dread disease of cholera. Before its course was stayed, 68 of their number had contracted the disease, and 13 members of the camp had died. So, this is the picture of Zion's Camp being saved by the storm. It's pretty dark, honestly, and them praying because of cholera outbreak. Anyways, let's keep going. During the first week of May in 1834, the first group of Mormon defenders left Ohio and Michigan and headed for Missouri. Unfortunately, just before departure of the Ohio contingent, the postmaster in nearby Chardon, Ohio, sent a letter to the postmaster in Independence stating with exaggerated numbers that from 200 to 600 Mormons had organized to take by force of arms their possessions in Jackson County. When the news reached Missouri's western counties, an immediate alarm was sounded among the local citizens to prepare for what they considered to be a belligerent invasion. Yes, exaggerating. Where have we seen that? In June, after a 6-week, 800-mile journey, Zion's Camp arrived in eastern Clay County. It was at this time that an unnamed Lexington, Lafayette County resident wrote to his father in Mason County, Kentucky, The whole country is in an uproar, and there will be much blood shed. However, on June 19th, a large violent summer storm struck at the mob's campsite, preventing the frenzied citizens from attacking. On June 21st, there was even a church movie made about that, about the whole Zion's Camp March. There's so much that happened during that was key and pivotal to church history. It's truly fascinating. So, wow. On June 21st, while camped near Fishing River in Clay County, Joseph Smith and the leaders of Zion's Camp met with Clay County Sheriff Cornelius Gillum and Colonel John Sconce of Ray County to clarify their objective and to correct false rumors about their mission. Because, yeah, it's always been these false rumors. Like, with the world being so less connected, there's always been a bunch of problems because of that. It means that rumors had more weight, because this is what led to all these tragedies all the time. Rumors. And especially by people who are disaffected, accusers who are false in their charges. I could go on about that for a long time, and its modern rearing of its head. Nothing new under the sun. Anyway, so they were clarifying their mission. Following the discussion, the leaders on both sides signed a document of accord. It is not our intention to commence hostilities against any man, person, or property. Fortunately, for the Mormons, the peace agreement pacified the locals, several hundred of whom had gathered from neighboring counties to fight the Mormons, had peace not been negotiated. No quarter would have been given, wrote one county regulator. We could have killed almost most of them before they got across the river. On June 22nd, the day after the signing of a truce, a revelation of the prophet informed the saints that they would have to wait for a little season for the redemption of Zion. Okay, I'm thinking about the psychology of this situation. Imagine having the Zion's camp of 200, who they're basically told by the governor, look, we can help you get back in there so you can get your property, but then you have to take care of it yourself. And they're like, okay, well, we're going to do this. So then members of the church are like, yeah, we're gonna go fight to redeem Zion. And that word gets out, and the rumor spreads because of a letter that they're coming to take it back by force, and they're going to murder anyone in their way, those bloodthirsty Mormons. Instead of, we're going to defend Zion, it becomes, they're going to attack and take them on. Okay, well, that gets down there, and, well, my brother heard it, so it must be true, and he's a trustworthy man. Oh, so you get everyone up in arms. Suddenly you have a group of 700 men or something ready to fight those Mormons when they're coming to. You just sit there and go, what is really going on here? But no, that's not what happens. Instead of people sitting and thinking, wait, why are these people coming from afar forcefully to try and take back their property by force? It just takes a little bit of critical thinking, but I doubt that was going on. I think the rumors were going so wild, there was hardly any truth in them at all, other than the fact that there were Mormons coming from the north armed. I don't know how much truth would have been in the rumors. And so in the end, you then have this greater force. And they're like looking at each other, and Joseph Smith's like, we came here to peacefully gather our stuff and just defend ourselves. And they're like, we're going to kill you. And it's like, why? For the saints, it looks like it's just further persecution. For the people who are defending Missouri and stuff, they think there's some sort of attacking army, and there's not. And so they sign this peace treaty, and they're like, oh yeah, we showed them. We would have killed every one of them. Really? For what? The problems of miscommunication and assumption, and even after signing the peace treaty, and even after clarifying what is going on. You still have people walking away from the table saying, oh, see, we showed them. I don't get it. I never liked that attitude. I think it is the stupidest attitude to have, of walking away. Even if they were the bigger power, it's still a stupid attitude to have. The proper attitude to have is to clearly understand one another. Okay. They're skipping over so many details, I can tell, because they're trying to get to, this is the background to what happens at Hawn's Mill, which I can understand. So I just better keep going, because I just sit here and think of the psychology of the situation. I'm just like, this isn't good on any side. Anyway, so on July 23rd, Zion's camp marched toward Liberty, camping in the field of George Burkett, one of the exiled Mormons, near Rush Creek, 2 miles east of Clay County Courthouse. Here, members of Zion's camp were stricken with a deadly attack of cholera, leaving 15 dead, including 2 Mormons who lived nearby, Algernon Sidney Gilbert and 6-year-old Phoebe Murdoch. Oh. Joseph Smith next moved to Lyman White's residence, an old log cabin at Michael Arthur's farm, 4 miles south of Liberty, and on July 3rd assisted White in discharging members of Zion's camp. On July 7th, while at Arthur's property, the prophet organized the Missouri presidency, with David Whitmer designated as president of the church in Zion, William W. Phelps and John Whitmer as counselors, and high counselors of 12 men to assist. With the Missouri leadership organized, Joseph Smith and most of the camp members returned to Kirtland. 4 key messages in the revelation received at Fishing River directed the activities of the saints in Missouri for the next 2 years. 1, Zion was to be redeemed after a designated little season. Who knows how long that's supposed to be. Saints were to remain in Clay County. And 3, the church would continue to gather to Clay County to make ready for another attempt to redeem Zion. And 4, certain Missouri church leaders were to receive a spiritual endowment in the temple at Kirtland concerning the anticipated return to Zion. After returning to Ohio, Joseph Smith, on August 16, 1834, wrote to the leaders in Clay County giving them a date for the return, 2 years from the 11th of September, so that's September 11th, 1836, is the appointed time for the redemption of Zion. Hence, they had 2 years to prepare to return to Jackson County. So, before Joseph Smith ever left Missouri in 1834, plans were made for a second Zion's camp to return to the saints to their land. On September 24th, 1835, David Whitmer was titled Captain of the Lord's Hosts and was appointed lead to the army back to Jackson County. However, later deliberations in council abandoned that plan, and a second Zion camp was never organized. So this is a picture of David Whitmer. And let's continue. All right, so they had that. So to promote the second message, that of the gathering of the leaders in Missouri, we're told to take the initiative and encourage members living in the East to gather to Clay County, and to be ready to move in force into Jackson County at the appointed time. As the saints gathered, they were told to do so diplomatically, and to be mindful of the Clay County citizens. And let all my people who dwell in the regions round about be very faithful and prayerful and humble before me, and reveal not the things which I have revealed unto them. The revelation counseled, and talk not of judgments, neither boast of faith, nor of mighty works. Remember I was talking about how the showy things of standing up and speaking kind of gibberishly and then having someone else stand up to interpret it. I'm like, that's not the way. I don't know. I read that as further recommendation toward that. that you don't boast of mighty works. You don't boast of, well, I'm more faithful than you, and God's going to give me this land, and other things like that. It's just the wrong attitude to have. The reason here's the attitude I think that people should have. We're all God's children. Look, you may not agree with me, but you're human, I'm human, we are God's children. Okay? I believe I have the fullness of the truth. Yes, that's true. But whatever you're willing to abide by in truth is good. So I would invite you to have all of it, learn more, learn like we do. But if you do not want to, that is your choice. Now, I hope we can convince you to get more knowledge and light, and the best way to see what's good or not is to read and do the things in the scriptures and under the direction of the counsel that we do. And hopefully, the people are a good example to show what happens. And heaven forbid if it's not. The dichotomy of someone saying, I'm religiously good and right, but then be followed up with their judgmental, self-centered, and etc. is a very bad combination. So don't boast of faith or mighty works. As additional Mormon immigrants began arriving in Clay County in 1835, and in greater numbers in 1836, some purchased land, as did the exiled members, until they owned more than 3,600 acres in the county. These lands, privately owned, were not administered under the church's consecration rules. In settling Clay County, the Latter-day Saints established 14 settlements or Mormon neighborhoods along a 25-mile stretch at the southern end and lower eastern edge of the county, with an increasing population of more than 1,000 members of the church. The revelation given at Fishing River also instructed the church to gather many warriors to Clay County. Before returning to Kirtland in 1834, Joseph Smith began to make plans for Second Zion's camp, with David Whitmer as its leader. A year later, on September 24th, 1835, Joseph Smith and the Kirtland High Council appointed David Whitmer captain of the Lord of Hosts, and Frederick G. Williams and Sidney Rigdon his assistants. Reported John Whitmer. In his own journal on that September date, Joseph Smith recorded, "This day drew up an article of enrollment for the redemption of Zion, that we may obtain volunteers to go next spring to Missouri." Continuing, he said, "I ask God in the name of Jesus that we may obtain 800 men, or 1,000 well armed." The prophet was resolute. "We go next season to live or die in Jackson County." In March 1836, Joseph set the departure of their removing to Zion to be on or before the 15th of May. Thus, it would be shortly after Kirtland Temple dedication and 4 months before the September deadline. The Kirtland Endowment. So, 2 years, here they are preparing for it. Meanwhile, leaders in Clay County had been called to Kirtland to help build the temple, to generally aid the church, and to help prepare for a strong return to Jackson County in 1835. W. Phelps and John Whitmer were assigned to assist with the publication of the Latter-day Saints Messenger and Advocate, and Phelps was to publish the Doctrine and Covenants containing the revelations of Joseph Smith, since the publication would include revelations about the United Firm organized at Independence. Church leaders desired to protect from unwarranted litigation their business interests as described in the 5 revelations about the firm to be included in the new book of Scripture. The United Firm had been dissolved after 2 troubled years of heavy debt, particularly because of unexpected losses suffered at Independence in 1833. Like fields being burned, printing presses being destroyed, men and women being turned out of their houses. That economically sets people back. Consequently, leaders decided to publish the revelations about the firm by using protective fictitious words or code names in place of certain nouns used in the revelations, including disguising the firm's name. Moreover, in addition to the presence of the above 2 leaders, Bishop Partridge, David Whitmer, John Corrill, and others from the Missouri were at Kirtland to receive their spiritual enrichment or endowment in connection with the events associated with the temple dedication, as they had been promised in June of 1834 revelation. On March 29th, 2 days after the temple dedication, Joseph Smith, Frederick G. Williams, and Sidney Rigdon, Hiram Smith, Oliver Cowdery met together to receive their final instruction before they journeyed west to redeem Zion. Since all preparations had been completed, or were about to be, the above presidency of the church sought for a revelation from God to teach us concerning our going to Zion, wrote Joseph Smith. However, on April 2nd, church leaders, including Captain David Whitmer, met again and after mature deliberation, dropped their plans to redeem Zion. The Second Zion's Camp's efforts was not spoken of again. Instead, the leaders authorized money to buy other land in Missouri. Think about that. This is a perfect example of, you see the fallibility of men, but in trying to live in accordance with the Lord and his principles, they are able to abandon their earthly plans. Because look at it. If you look at the words over here, it sounds like they were gunning for a fight. Round 2. Let's gun for a fight, right? We're going to be here. We're going to get back what's ours rightfully, even if we have to, post sentries and be an occupying force, etc. And instead, they bring their qualms to the Lord, and the Lord shows them a different way, a better way, a peaceful way. And because they're humble enough before the Lord, they are willing to drop their contentious way. So this is what's very fascinating to me, is when people who are against the Church of Jesus Christ come to us and sit there and they have this. I've seen this argument online in a couple of ways, and I can't remember if it's just the same person saying this a couple of times, or this person says it a couple of times and maybe one or two other people follow suit. They try and attack the church on infallibility, right? That if you don't have some infallible source, then you can't know anything, which is an extremely, very stupid way to look at things, in my opinion. So there's my ad hominem attack, but the reason why is because you can know things with surety. You can know things with confidence, but it also allows you to understand that there are times where you can stop and adapt according to what's needed and what you need to know and what you need to do. It's like you can know that Newtonian physics works 100%, but you can also know that it may not be complete, because it is fallible, because there are edge cases, there are things that don't make sense, specifically in Newtonian physics. And so, leaving that possibility open, because it is fallible, because it was, figured out and discovered by humans and describes specific things, it works 100%. You have a surety that it works, but you also know that it doesn't work perfectly all the time. It allows for you to get more room to learn more things. So that's why having this absolute standard, or the absolute infallibility, and if you don't have infallibility, then you can't know anything. Really? You can know what works in these situations. You can know what works for these specific principles. So this means you can live with assurance and with correct principles. And you can also know that you can grow or get more information or learn more in new and different circumstances. So the reason I bring this up is because here you have Joseph Smith doing something that he often did things to the best of his ability, best of his knowledge. And there are times where if he was doing it, and even though he felt it was a good idea, it turned out that it was just him doing his best and not really the Lord's instructions. You can kind of see some fingerprints on there about that. You can see Brigham Young do the same thing, where he was really angry and pissed off and he wanted to grab an army, start a militia, etc., followed by which he then, in the afternoon, said, well, in the morning you heard Brigham Young the man speaking, Now this is Brigham Young the prophet speaking, and he came with humility, with love, with desire to do right by what the Lord wants. And you can see as soon as you put aside your wants and desires to act more in accordance with what God wants, there's a night and day difference in a lot of respect. And that's the thing. Like, if you just take a step back from your point of view and what you're doing, and you look at it from, what is it really God wants? That's a really good judgment of what you're doing. What path are you going down? Because if you're going down a path of craziness, of, hey, I feel like I should go to Jerusalem and start preaching in the streets, take a step back and think about it for a little while and go, is this my will? Is this my own aggrandizement? Is this my own martyrdom I'm going for? Is it to make myself look big or feel big in the presence of the Lord? Or is this really what he wants? I think what he really wants is the best for all his children, including you. So if there are extraordinary things that God wants you to do, I think God will provide extraordinary means of calling you to that work. At the same time, by small and simple things, we can accomplish a lot. And it is good to act on those good and simple and small things that are there for you to start on. Get used to that. Call repentance to those around you. Learn more and in different ways. So, that was the Kirtland Endowment. Now for Mormon resettlement in Caldwell County and Davis counties. After the temple was dedicated, 4 wise men, Bishop Edward Partridge, W. Phelps, Isaac Morley, and John Corll, returned to Missouri with money to buy land in the unorganized territory attached to Ray County. Upon their return, they searched out possible locations where the main body of the church could settle in peace. John Whitmer wrote, "This shift in plans was timely." See how that works out? Once again, agitation against the Latter-day Saints in Clay County had already begun. The old residents had never considered allowing the Mormons to remain in the county permanently. Yet the fact that many citizens feared the growing Mormon presence and the possibility of them gaining political dominance, similar to those expressed earlier in Jackson County, induced rage among the citizens. The poor, deluded mortals, with all their experience in Jackson, began to tell the citizens of Clay the same old tale, wrote Joseph Thorpe, that this country was theirs by gift of the Lord. He continued, "This kind of talk, with their insolence and impudent behavior, so enraged the citizens that they began to consult about the best course to rid themselves of a sect of religious fanatics, as they viewed them." This picture, though the Saints had been initially welcomed as refugees in Clay County, that welcome soon wore thin, and some of their old settlers in Clay County turned to violent and other unlawful measures to remove the Mormons from the county. Few things could invoke as much terror among the Saints as an angry mob. So I have a picture of an angry mob. Jeez. Okay. Yeah. Like, think of it from their point of view. And this has happened again in the United States, by the way. But unfortunately, this depended on where the politicians decided to allow things to go and the people that were already there. So, for example, there was a small town. I can't even remember which state it was in. I can't remember if it was Illinois or Wisconsin or wherever. There was a religious sect that decided to gather in some little place. I think it was originally started in India. And it was like a small town, a population of like 200-300. And then suddenly like 800 people of the sect come in. They immediately take over politically. The people who are already there and have been there for generations can't move out. Because if they move out, who's going to buy their homes? No one wants to buy their homes except those who are of this religious sect, and they're offering pittance. So they're kind of trapped there. They ask for redress. They talk about how unfair it is, but they even get a news spot. But nothing happens, right? And there's a lot of things that seem very unfair about it. But that's the same thing here. But the thing is that the people there were actually ready to mob them and make their life absolute misery. And so Jackson County is south of the Missouri River, and that has independence, where Liberty is Clay County, which is north of the Missouri River. So, Davies County. Oh, these are small counties. Interesting. Sorry, this is the map that they have for this. I would pause it so that you can look at it. But it's kind of an interesting one. So, yeah, when you sit there and say stupid things like, hey, this is a gift to us by God. It may be, but they're still your neighbors. The insolence and other things like that. Like, it's just... Oh, God, small town living. And small town politics. It just... Small communities, and especially depending on the culture that you have there. Remember, these people are Southerners back in the 1830s, and during that time, they still have a very strong culture of honor-based culture. Like, you insult me, we're coming to fisticuffs over words, right? And that was prevalent. The honor-type culture is something that, like, look at Hamilton, right? Having duels and things like that. It's not just the Southerners. It's an honor culture type thing of, you have caused me enough pain and anger and frustration that we've got to resolve this. So we are going to duke it out and finish this. Pardon me. So yeah, when you have... When you have...
Oh yeah, Dad. My play is on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday.
I got you. So when you have the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints acting like fanatics and zealots, yeah, I get it. But at the same time, I'm just sitting here wondering, like, what brought this on? Was it both the saints who were acting inappropriately and rebelliously, or was it mainly just the mobs? Because how you structure things makes a difference. And so if you have the people of the saints, who are mainly Northerners, coming into a place that has mainly Southern culture, and you have them, if you have the saints being judgmental, religious zealots, who keep saying, well, we're going to inherit this land, we're going to take your land because it's given to us by God, and then they're taking over politically because of their numbers, and you have them saying things like that, and being snide and rude, and then by your honor culture, as someone who is there, just seeing that they're going to be taking over and destroying everything that you've worked for in your own mind, because they're just taking over by numbers. It's funny, but then you have how many saints were like that, but yet you can see how diligent they were as workers, how they have good reputations as well mixed in. So how does this all work out? Like, have the good that the saints are and get from living their religion, but do without the self-centeredness, the self-righteousness, the I'm the chosen one and you're going to bow to me kind of crap. Be humble. Like, this is why people need to learn to be generous winners and gracious losers, even in small things. Because why be bitter if you're losing, right? And you should act and know that, look, children of God just like you, and they have their own hopes and dreams. And this is why the principles, the true original principles governing the United States in its originality, not what it's become now, is the best way to govern people. Because people who have different desires and ideals, if they're going to be here in the millennium, we can't just sit there and say, haha, see, we were right. That would be dumb. That would be extremely dumb. Nobody, I pray none of us do that. Because it's like, they're also here, you moron. Yeah, they're good enough to stick around, and Jesus Christ has no problem dealing with them too. So how about we actually work together to make things right? Okay. I'm really trying to understand, how in the world did the saints have this attitude? Just be humble, good people. And, oh yeah. I wonder how many of them caused the problems and how many of them were just innocence in the crossfire. All right, so they viewed them as religious fanatics. To remedy the situation, community leaders, including some friends to the Mormons, held a meeting at Liberty Courthouse on June 29th, 1836, to discuss some options. Though without the least right under the Constitution, they persuaded the Mormons to leave the county. The temper at the meeting was volatile, and the committee advised the Mormons to avoid future bloody conflict by seeking a home where they may obtain large and separate bodies of land and have a community of their own. On July 1st, the Mormon leaders agreed that the saints, as asked, would stop immigration and find a new place to settle for the sake of their friendship and to be in a covenant of peace, wrote W. Phelps. So, unfortunately, violence against the saints had already begun with fervor in the eastern part of Clay County. Vigilantes stopped Mormon wagons coming from the east on the main road and turned them back to the neighboring Ray County, which has Richmond, north of the Missouri River again, as the city Richmond. They had been flocking in here faster than ever, making great talk what they would do, said Anderson Wilson, mob leader. Drusilla Hendricks and her husband, James, having recently arrived, found that the old citizens were afraid that the Mormons would take away their place and nation, wrote Drusilla. The citizens acknowledged that they were violating the peace and trampling on the law and Constitution, but we cannot help it, Wilson declared. Indeed, several outrages were committed against the Mormons. During one incident, a mob took a Mormon out of company and gave him 100 lashes, and it is thought he will die of this beating, referring to his volunteer companies of raiders patrolling the roads of eastern Clay County. Wilson said that they would fight by each other's side and die if necessary, driving the Mormons from the county. But the Mormons quickly agreed with Phelps' pledge and soon began to move. That's what it got to. It got to mobocracy. That we will push these people out. Oh my gosh. Both the saints being, it's a cycle. It's a reactionary cycle, is what it is. There's no, you can't, oh God. I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this properly, because I want to say something along the lines of, you can't blame either side about it starting. But I'm like, well, there must have been some sort of impetus somewhere, because it's easy to blame both sides. It's easy to say, well, there's blame on both sides. And it's easy to say, well, you can't blame both sides. It's not that easy. It's all very gray. Because, again, if you're having these religious fanatic attitudes of, this land is going to be mine, and so we're going to take over it eventually anyway, you don't think that's going to put people on edge? You think if you come in and you be judgmental, you think if you, but that's an assumption. I don't know how judgmental they were. And yet at the same time, the people who are already here could be taking offense, which itself is a bad way of doing things. But when you have people sitting there saying that, oh, we're going to take over this land and it's going to be ours anyway, and then they are moving in mass to the point where they're right, that they're going to take over your city, your town, your county, your country, so that you will have no place in it even though you were there first. We'll see it here. They're going to react this badly. And it's just a cycle of reaction to reaction to reaction to reaction. So, maybe it's just neighborly chafing, right? Different cultures coming together. Someone chafes at the other, doesn't matter who. So it starts to spiral that, you have neighbors who start to be snide and obnoxious to one another. And so one of them starts to take more offense, so the other starts to take more offense. So one side says something stupid, so the other side says something stupid. But now that things are soured, they always read the worst into it instead of the best into it. Instead of giving someone grace, they think of them as being horrible monsters, and then that whole squeezing tube from the middle of the toothpaste or chewing cereal too loud is too much. That's not the original problem. It's not. The original problem is the lack of trust. That's what it is. It's not who said who, or who said what, and all that kind of stuff. That's not the original problem. It's the lack of trust. It's the deep offense that people are not willing to give up. And the question comes, what happened to that saint? Was he just pulled out to be an example? Was it just a mob being cruel? Because yes, that can happen. And that man could be innocent. Or it could be the other way around. Or it could be that the person who was part of the church was really mouthing off in ways because he could, because it was his right to say what he wants to say. And yeah, it was an atrocity for them to do it. But at the same time, if he's sitting there saying, oh, the hand of the Lord is against you and he's going to destroy you, and may your filth be wiped from the face of the earth, and it's like, do you not get what's going on here? Do you not get the reality of the situation, that you are unwanted because of attitudes like that? And that here you are, you're all trying to gather here and destroy us, and you're the example of someone saying that you hope God wipes us from the face of the earth? Do you see how this can spiral reaction to reaction? This is just a reactionary spiral that keeps getting worse. No wonder it spiraled out of control. So the big question in my mind is, okay, now that I'm observing this, I sit here and go, how would you stop this? How would you stop this? This is where you need to listen to the Lord and his revelations. I'm reminded of the story that I read in Stories of Faith and Courage from the Latter-day Saints. The one where the Ute chief Wakara was coming up through one of the settlements in southern Utah, and he let his horses go, and in the middle of their fields. And the settlers were like, no, that's our grain. And Wakara was like, no, this is my land. They're like, look, the land is yours. You can have your horses and everything else anywhere you'd like, but not the fields. The fields are ours. And so they drove the horses out. They weren't mean or rude. They just insisted that the fields are ours. And they started doing their war whooping and everything else like that. And the saints had to prepare inside their fort. And they talked about a 16-year-old girl who was a wife melting down lead so that her husband could fight if they needed to. But in the morning, between the fortifications that the saints had, Chief Wakara decided, it's not worth it. But they continued to have discourse and relations with each other because they knew that if they capitulated on this, that the Indians would come and just make their life hell. Yet at the same time, they didn't want to make them enemies and fire on them, they rode a very razor-thin line. And they did it rightly. Nobody was harmed. They actually were able to maintain goodwill. They defended themselves, said, we're here to stay. These fields are ours. You can have the horses everywhere else. That's no problem. But the fields of grain are ours because that's our food. They did not work to cause offense, and they did not seek to fight, but were willing to defend themselves. That's a very precarious situation, but they found it through. Here, you can see both sides reacting worse and worse and worse to each other, and it only makes things worse and worse and worse, because it just confirms in every other person's mind that the other side are just terrible, awful people. And yeah, the atrocities are on the side of the people, the Missourians who were there. They're the ones who mobbed them. They are the ones who mobbed and broke peace, broke treaties, broke faith, broke trust. I get it. In almost all respects, the people of Missouri are in the wrong with everything that they did. There are things that the church members did that weren't good, and later on, well, I don't know if they'll address it, but later on there were members of the church who did their own little raids before they were getting thrown out because they were tired of this crap. And I don't blame them, but it did not make things better. I got that from the saints. So anyway, they're basically like, all right, so the people who acted as their saviors from the atrocities in Jackson County are now turning on them because, again, I just think of, that crazy uncle who comes to your house because his life has hit rock bottom and he now treats your house like a flop house. Do you really want him on your couch and just absolutely messing up his life and your life and making a life miserable for you and your family? Or, what was the church members like that? The undesirable uncle they just didn't want? Yeah, no, not in the same way. Because it's weird. You can see that they appreciated how hardworking and industrious they were, but at the same time, those perceived threats of, well, God gave us this country. It's ours. When someone there is talking about, well, yeah, we had to trample the Constitution to defend ourselves. It's just, there's all sorts of things that are wrong in so many ways about this whole situation. All right, let me see if I can finish this off. Do you need me to drive you anywhere, dear? Okay. Actually, I'm going to have to stop here. Nuts. I was only a page and a half away. I'm really going to have to think on this. That'll end the first chapter. I'm really going to have to think on this. I'm going to have to think about it. It is not an equal share of blame on both sides. Despite how annoying and terrible of neighbors certain saints probably could have been, the actual atrocities are in the hands of those who are in Missouri. So the blame is definitely not equal. But the question to how do you stop something like that is more important. I think it's best to stop it before it starts. But once it starts, whether we like it or not, how is it resolved appropriately and properly? That's something to think on. And it's the same in your own life. If you have a fight or a problem that just continues to go around and around and around, or spiral into dissolution of relationship because you no longer have trust in the people that are around you or that you have that relationship with, how do you stop? How do you rebuild? I think it's important that you break the cycle. And it doesn't matter which side does it. And in fact, often, whichever side does break the cycle is often not pleasant because hostilities will continue. They're testing, you know, how far does this really go? Or are we just going to go back into the same cycle again and keep fighting each other? And is it possible to break that cycle when you're at a power disadvantage? If you have more power and you break the cycle, that's a lot more poignant and easy. But if you don't have power, can you break the cycle? That's a question I have to ponder. So, think on these things, and most importantly, have it guide you in your personal relationships. Because despite this being talked about on a society level, just two people have this as well. Whether that's spouses, siblings, friends, neighbors. Sometimes it is best to just get room. And that's what people of Missouri were insisting on. Is it the right thing? Well, may God's Spirit be with you. We'll see you.